Welcome to Spatial Signals. It's a podcast about remote sensing and geographic information systems, but more importantly, the people behind them. I'm your co-host, Dr. Brad Shellito, and with me today is your other co-host, coming to us from his pirate radio station by the gas pumps at the convenience store at Hollow Mountain in Hanksville, Mr. Chris McGinty. Chris, how is Utah treating you today?
Oh, the service out here in Hanksville is not great.
That's why your internet just keeps cutting in and out. You know, you're going into that like Hollow Mountain with the convenience store stuck in the side there.
It's a bit of a problem.
Not fair. It's a good place to hide pirate radio. You know,
it is a good place, but the service is just not stellar. So, you know, I'll be in and out. We'll see, you know, but fortunately we're not here to listen to me, well, or you for that matter. So, you know.
Yes, because today we do have a very special episode coming up here.
Yes, you're right. But how's Ohio today, Brad?
Warm, sunny. We are so glad that winter is a cold and snow-filled distant memory at this point. So I vaguely remember the foot of snow plus, right? You know, so we're just trying to keep it out. Well, for those of you just joining us, this podcast is sponsored by AmericaView, the National Geospatial and Remote Sensing Network, which is dedicated to empowering Earth observation. Now, AmericaView has been around since 2003 and has grown from a program just within the state of sunny, not cold Ohio to a network of programs that stretch across the United States, working with remote sensing, GIS, and geospatial technologies in all forms of outreach, research, and education. Now, today, as I mentioned, is the fourth episode of our sub-series here on Spatial Signals, which is called The Squared Circle, in which we have a whole group of guests on to wrestle with a particular topic. And here in round 4 of The Squared Circle, we're going to be grappling with teaching GIS, which is a topic that everybody out here is going to be dealing with one way or another, whether you've taken a class, whether you're teaching a class, whether you're thinking about taking or teaching a class. So before we get into it, I'm going to throw things back to Chris for a little background on today's match.
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, this is, you know, something that's, I think, near and dear to everybody's heart here that's going to join us today, and including both of us who've taught a lot of years of GIS and had a lot of history with using different software and different methods and techniques to teach GIS and geospatial theory and technology. But I kind of wanted to, you know, back up, you know, and this is something we've had some discussions about before, Brad, and I want to reference, you know, a number of folks. You know, you can go back into the archives, but you should head back and listen to Dr. Joe Kursky's episode from formerly of Esri and now doing his own thing. But he also spent a lot of time talking about teaching GIS and the importance of spatial thinking. And so one of the things that I wanted to kind of, you know, back out before we start really focusing in on this idea of teaching GIS is the idea of spatial thinkers, and more educators and people in the workforce and workforce leaders are really recognize the importance of spatial thinking. And, you know, this has always been an important thing for humans to understand. And it's certainly been critical for GIS and geospatial professionals in the past. But any more spatial thinking is not just for geospatial professionals. It's becoming a I guess what I call a core skill for everyone. And, you know, if you go back to Dr. Kursky's episode or some of our others, you know, we've talked about spatial thinking, but really spatial thinking is this ability to understand patterns and relationships and changes across space and time. And it helps students ask better questions, helps people understand the world around them better. It helps folks, you know, ask where something is happening and why it's happening and what might happen next. And so there's even some predictive, you know, opportunities for predictive qualities and understanding spatial thinking and patterns and things that come up. So GIS has historically been, you know, one of the best tools we have for teaching spatial thinking. I mean, a paper map, Brad, if you remember paper maps.
Paper maps. Wait, I vaguely seem to remember those, right. Yes.
But you know, GIS and you know, previously, you know, paper maps that you could actually hold were the ways that we taught spatial thinking. It makes data visible and interactive, and students can really explore this, you know, real data sets and test ideas and understand relationships and patterns that they can see, you know, within the GIS data itself or on a map, and start to, you know, perform even simple analysis just as you're looking at these different types of data. So today, as we're talking about GIS and teaching GIS specifically, you know, we're really talking about building a kind of literacy that helps students interpret the world, use data responsibly, prepare for a wide range of careers. And today's guests are awesome. They're all professionals in teaching GIS and engaging with students and teaching that next generation of folks that are going to be out there using this data. But I want to leave this intro with spatial thinking, geospatial technology, and data is no longer just a tool that folks are using. It has been incorporated into so many different aspects of what we do in society and in business and in just about every time we turn around, there's some aspect of geospatial thinking or GIS. So Brad, with that, I'm super excited. We're going to have a great conversation today.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Chris. Well, for our guests out there, your full card for round 5 today is 3 very special guests, all of whom have been previous guests on the show. So you can always go back into our archives and hear their stories about how they took the science and did something big with it here. But all of them have extensive experience with teaching all different forms of GIS. So, by way of introduction, first off, our first guest here on the show today is Ms. Robin Abbott from the Department of Geography at Miami University. Welcome back to the show, Robin.
Hey, glad to be here.
Secondly, is Dr. Forrest Bolick from the Department of Earth, Geographic, and Climate Science of the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Thanks for coming back on, Forrest.
Good to be here from the top rung, as they say.
And last but not least, our last returning guest is Dr. Courtney Poirier-Chicola from the Regional Applications Center at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Thanks for coming back, Courtney.
Hi, thanks, Brad and Chris. I'm glad to be here as part of the Squared Circle.
All right. Well, now that we have our whole card assembled here, the first thing I was going to do is ask each of you to sort of set the tone for our match here. Is what is your particular approach to teaching GIS? We know that historically there's been a lot of ways to do it. You can just simply teach all theory or just start just pushing buttons or do a mix of theory and application. And like Chris said, GIS has come a long way from simply being able to, absorb all the theory about topology. It's come a long way from just working through steps in a workbook, getting the answer in the back of the book and calling it a day. So I just wanted to kind of first ask each one of you, what is your approach to how you teach GIS? And I'd like to start with Robin first.
Oh, gee, thanks for teeing me up on that one.
You are first tagged in here, so.
Honestly, I'll say I've listened to the podcast with both Courtney and Forrest leading up to this, and I suspect you might get some similar answers across the 3 of us. But my approach is to, in all of our classes and our programs, is to give students a mix of fundamentals and then also times to play with the software, play with the data. And get hands-on. We set up our classes such that there's not a set-aside lecture time and then a set-aside lab time. We have 2 80-minute sessions per week. And in each of those classes, it's a mix of they get some lecture, some background, and they're off to doing, to try and build up some of that muscle memory of what you have to do in a software package in order to get the answers that you want. We also have started putting into our classes at the upper level that they are working on real life projects. So we partner with people in agencies and companies in our local area who have problems that need to get solved. And our students in the upper level classes get to do that as well. So they're not just doing the activities that we tell them to do. They have to answer to kind of an outside of here power, which usually levels it up for them. And they have to answer some questions for them as well. So the short and quick of mine is that it is very much a mix of fundamentals, which I will never get away from. They are so important, but mix those fundamentals with some real quick being able to get in there and also do the doing.
Well, that sounds good. Forrest, where do you come down on the teaching of GIS for your approach?
I'm mostly embedded into introductory GIS teaching anymore, so I get to spend a lot of time working with people from every major or program conceivable who are dipping their toes into the wonderful geospatial world. So I focus a lot on foundational theory and practice. And I think the key for my approach is to try to make sure that those are interwoven as best as possible. I, of course, despise any kind of lab or work through that is just pushing buttons for 20 pages or 20 hours or however long it takes someone. without the deeper meaning or connective tissue at the end of having students make their own products. But at the same time, I think you can do theory that way too, and never see the practical or important practice side implications of that. So whenever I'm working with my introductory GIS students, I'm trying to connect those two pieces together using a lot of examples that, of course, guide them through the core components of what they need to know and learn to be able to do the certain topic or process or what have you that we're working on. But then they're making stuff. I strongly believe that a GIS course, and especially an introductory one, you should be making stuff all the time. So much to the fact that my labs are called production activities at the end of them, where people are then producing maps that could be functional in a lot of different contexts. Because when I have everything from conservation or environmental science majors to maybe physics or math majors to public health and public policy majors. I want to try to do a mix of things so that can all feel connected to it. But at the same time, try to establish some standards that give them, some interesting products that they could use maybe in a portfolio. Maybe it's just, telling the parents or the grandparents or whoever that you're making something fun in that class about maps. So having a tangible thing is really one of the most important things in my teaching approach.
Yeah, I totally get that, because that's the way it is in the intro and advanced type GIS classes that I'm teaching, is that at the end of every assignment, there's some sort of deliverable. And, most of the time it's going to be some kind of a web app nowadays that they're being built and building up sort of this whole online portfolio of, oh, here's an app that does this, here's an app that does that with what they're talking about.
Yeah, and making something that isn't just the result of directions. It's not just you have clicked buttons for 2 hours and you made the thing, but make this and apply what you've learned to make that. I think is whatever the product might be is the important part.
Absolutely. And Courtney, where do you come into the squared circle with your own approach to GIS and teaching?
So, following my colleague, I was a TA for a long time under the direction of Rodney Yantis. And
Friend
so,
of the
since
show, Rodney Yantis.
yep,
We have
from the
heard his name a
show,
few times before.
Yes. And so recently, as of fall 25, I am now an adjunct instructor in the School of Geosciences at the university. So kind of taking up, that torch of continuing the GIS legacy from the RAC perspective. So the two introductory classes I teach kind of follow the Esri's GIS tutorial book, teaching the students, to get comfortable with the terminology and the jargon. They do hate my quizzes, but I told them they're going to benefit from actually knowing the jargon, knowing the terms, especially when they go out into the workforce and, a boss tells them to do something and then they'll actually know what it means. And in that first class, I do bring out a topo quad. They have to learn about township, section, and range and identifying features on a physical map. Then we move into remote sensing and learning about image and photo interpretation and how that can be used in a GIS setting. And then in advanced GIS, we kind of bridge those, vector and raster processes, and they make some sort of analysis out of those data sets. And then lastly, capstone, it's all focusing on integrating Python scripting and Geo AI into some sort of final project. So in each class, they do have to have a final project, normally in the form of a story map that they either pick some sort of research challenge in environmental science. Some I've seen take data that they collected at work that they're actually able to use in class, because I have some who work for environmental and engineering companies. So I've had some LiDAR projects doing tree segmentation of crown coverage. I've had, students who had undergraduate research projects in urban heat island do a final project on that. So the beginning classes are really heavy in theory and the fundamentals of what GIS is before even touching the computer. Then we get really into the nitty gritty of, understanding the interface, understanding the buttons on the ribbon, the tabs when you add in these different data sets, what's the difference between a feature layer, a multidimensional raster, a CAD layer, and just trying to make it a holistic enough for those that actually go through the GIS certification program, that they're set to where they actually have a portfolio of projects that they can go to a future employer and then work towards that GISP if they so fit to choose that direction. But I have students from all sorts of backgrounds: engineering, biology, anthropology, environmental science, geology. So the fundamentals is pretty generic in application, but their final project is where they really get to explore what they're most interested in about and finding those GIS data sets or creating their own to answer their research topic.
Okay, so now that we've heard from each of our competitors, their own individual fighting style with GIS, what we'd like to do is kind of move into a free-for-all. And I'd just like to throw this out. So what kind of specific teaching strategies do you employ? We've heard what you each have as your approach to this, but how do you really try and get this across to your students? What do you have to do in particular that you found is very effective, or in some cases that you tried and it wasn't so effective for teaching this GIS to your students?
Well, this is Robin. I can start us off with something that I actually just got done doing in the classroom that I find is that the students enjoy and helps to drive home some points. So one example is they have a lab where they have to work through a hazard mitigation plan. That's their kind of concept that they're working at. They're doing a tornado analysis for a hazard mitigation plan in a county. And if you're not familiar with how hazard mitigation plans work in the US, like the quick and dirty is that every county every 5 years has to have a hazard mitigation plan on file in order to gain access to FEMA funds if in case there is such a disaster. Part of that process is there has to be a public meeting in the community where literally maps are laid out and the public gets to say where these disasters are taking place. So what I make the students do is they have to change roles. So they start off first being in that they're the public in the public meeting. They roll out a map and I tell them, here's your Sharpie. You need to decide where it goes, how wide it is, and how destructive it is. So I put them in that role, and then they do that as a group. They talk about it and kind of get comfortable with one another. And then very quickly I have them switch into the role of the GIS person who's responsible now for taking that map, turning it into GIS data and doing the analysis with it. So they're not just handed the data that came from someplace else, and they're not just even recording data from somebody else. They were the ones that initially created the paper map of the data. So I have them switch roles like that. It's similar. We're about to do a mobile data collection lab and module in our class. And the first thing I have them do there is be the end user. So I have found that really helps a lot. If I allow them to be the end user of an application, let them go out and play with it and see how it works and how it's supposed to work and what it looks like when it's done. Kind of like if you were painting a painting and you show someone what the end result is supposed to look like, it helps them figure out kind of where to aim for. So they have to do that and they play the role of the intern. And then once they get done with that, I'm like, okay, you're no longer the intern, you're the intern's boss. And you have to create the next set of applications that are needed for the intern the next time. So I find giving them different roles to play kind of breaks up some of the monotony, turns on parts of their brain I'm pretty sure aren't turned on all the time when I'm just talking to them. And I found that they, as much as they're going to like coming to class, I found that they enjoy those types of activities.
It's such a fun idea when you're putting students into these roles that they're going to inhabit ideally later on in their career or their education or whatnot. One of the things that students, when they're coming into my intro GIS class, want to think about and want to play with is, well, how is this going to be relevant to me, in whatever the next phase of my work might be. So I really always enjoy playing with these real world examples as everyone is clamoring for, that then connect to when we're just learning how to clip stuff. Like when we introduce clip, it's like my fourth lab of the semester, and it's one of those things that like really starts to open people's minds. When they're like, wait, I can change the data, I can create new stuff. So just building up these opportunities for them to be doing these, really relevant and functional tasks is super super useful and important. One of the other things that I think I like to make in my course to kind of build up that relevancy is that when we get to our final project and there we do this poster conference where everyone's got their posters hanging up and showing off, and making sure that they're understanding how that they can connect that work to their other classes or their internship or their dissertation or whatever it might be, because uh, so often I think the students are seeing these courses not in a like holistic context. There are lanes, and what happens in one class doesn't impact another class. And so I get so many students who always ask me, "Oh, is it okay if I think about this class? You know, I'm doing something in this class, and I'd love to do some GIS with it, or you know, I'm doing this research project in this lab. Can I bring GIS in there?" And I'm always like enthusiastically a yes, because I think GIS and geospatial work in general is so integrative that that's what it's going to be when you're doing GIS. No, it doesn't matter if it's a GIS job or not, whatever that means. You're going to be integrating so often that it's just become so important to build up this mindset that you are actually bringing things together. And so that's what a GIS course should be for me, I think.
Yeah, so something that we do to start off with the class is everyone has to pick some sort of map from a current events article or research paper. And then they have to go through kind of their own rubric of, well, is this map telling me the story that it needs to tell? Well, you know, is the context correct? Is it confusing? You know, how is the use of color in the sense of, you know, the map elements? You know, is the north arrow there? Is the scale bar? Do we have an inset map to say what's the relative area of what we're looking at? And so the students get to dissect and say, you know, these pros and cons of what, you know, the map maker did correctly and what could be enhanced to help, you know, understand that critical thinking of different clients and end users, you know, what sort of deliverables that we need. Another thing is that we usually bring in guest lectures. So last semester I had someone from the engineering department from the surveying class come give a lecture on, you know, how survey data is collected, and then how do GIS users actually take that data and make something of it. And so having former students and guest lecturers showing, you know, how they use GIS in their everyday career and their job, and what projects do they work on, and just seeing the applicability and just the career aspirations of some of these students that, hey, I can do this as a job and a career, and this class is helping me prepare for that.
Now, how do you all approach this when it's an online class? Like all of these things you're describing, I mean, this all works great when you have the students there, you're engaged with them in a classroom, you have a hands-on environment where everybody can, you know, switch from listening to doing. But what do you do when it's an all online class and it's an asynchronous class and, you know, the students have stuff to read, they have videos to watch, they have things to do, but that connection isn't quite the same. How do you all approach that?
From my perspective, I started TAing back after COVID. And so I didn't really have the experience of teaching GIS online. I've taught other classes online, which was hard to say the least, from the perspective of, you know, class participation and yes, the readings. But during COVID, you know, it was kind of hard when everybody was hunkered down at home for them to stay on track and do what they needed to do. And so I really don't have any experience as of yet of teaching GIS on an online class setting.
One of the ways my course works is it is built in as we've used a million different terms at UMass for this: flex, format, multimodal, whatever you want to think about. But it means it's going in all the ways, all the possible ways you could teach the course at the same time, all the time. So I'll have students who are in a given semester, I'll have students in class with me doing all these things. I'll have students online following along live. I'll have students working along asynchronously. And so I really embrace a universal design ethos in the course where everything is accessible in multiple formats. but I'm giving students the flexibility and the options to connect with the course material in the way that is best for them. So I think it's more about designing activities or structures that gives students flexibility to engage with them. Anything that you do in a class, and this was one of the first things I was ever trained on when I was doing this, and this was before COVID, before we all got shot into the remote world, like we were in a cannon of some kind. I learned a lot from the folks at our Center for Teaching and Learning about breaking down the things that you're doing into a classroom and thinking about, okay, what's the goal of this? What's the purpose? Why are students having conversations live? You say you're doing this thing and they need to talk to each other. Why do they need to talk to each other? Once you break it down that way, then you can say, okay, here's what are ways you can replicate that online, either with like video chatting software, or how do you replicate it asynchronously. Discussion forums are kind of a default. Discussion forums are good for some things, but sometimes you actually want people to like comment on stuff back and forth. So maybe it's just Google Doc comments. Sometimes it's reviewing things and reviewing, output or materials or whatnot. And that's the goal of what you want students to do. So I approach my course from a very open and flexible format. But you can do it any way you want, and in a way that puts a lot of trust and responsibility on the students to then engage and make sure they're getting the most out of the course too.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. So at Miami, like everyone, like how Forrest said, shot like a cannon. I think that's actually a nice way to say how we all got thrown into the online world. And I always used to say when people would ask me, they're like, well, how about teaching this online? And I used to tell them that was like my worst nightmare that I hoped never came to fruition. And then suddenly there we were. So we were all kind of bungling through it at least for that first semester. During all that time, though, we also were asked at Miami to stand up a fully online GIS certificate. So we have one that's in person. We have one actually at the undergraduate level, one at the graduate level, and we were asked to duplicate the graduate one in the online space. COVID actually was a lot of practice for us to do that. And I will say that they definitely have, for what we've learned here at Miami for our students, the online classes have their audience. We learned pretty quickly that offering a lot of online asynchronous courses to students who are in person here in Oxford, traditional college student, it just was not the best for everyone. They were missing out on being in a classroom with students. They were missing out on face-to-face with instructors. Students were languishing sometimes. It takes sometimes a special student who can break through that barrier of constantly sending the emails, asking the questions every time they have a problem, really doing the reach out when there's not somebody in the classroom that they can just kind of give a side eye to that recognizes that look. So we have kind of, shifted how we're doing things here at Miami, and the fully online classes in the program are at the graduate level only, and they are available basically to your non-traditional students, people who are not in residence in Oxford doing a traditional degree. They're adding it on to other things. And it seems to fit, obviously, their way of life much easier. As we can all imagine, you're incorporating all of life into school. Things that we've done in those classes to try and get at some of those issues that even Forrest was mentioning too, is we have set up online office hours, so Zoom office hours. You don't even have to set up the Zoom. We have them set up. You just drop in and drop out to answer questions that way. Lots of back and forth over email, or like a shared Google Doc is also another way to do that. And then also just really having to break down that course material into teeny tiny bite-sized pieces, so that when someone has a question about something, you all can try and figure out exactly where that problem is happening. We learned a ton about, we started learning about how long is an attention span, how long should that video be? How long should this activity be? It's essentially the same content in our in-person and in our online classes. We cover the same topics with a lot of the same activities, just kind of, jerry-rigged a little bit to fit better online. But I will say, I know we do not have that nut cracked. I think there's a lot to be learned about how we teach online and how we teach in spaces where there can be a vacuum between the students and between the student and the instructor. So I think we all still have probably, a lot we can learn about how that best suits people, but I am all for having that option out there. I really do think that if we expect for spatial thinking to happen for everyone outside of just people who are now, graduating from high school and going through college, if we want that to be pervasive throughout the workplace, I think these online classes have to do that. And they have to be a bit more than the classes that you could go, say, to Esri.com and get through, and you'll learn stuff. I'm not saying you don't learn stuff. I love those classes. In fact, 2 of them are being assigned this week for one of my modules. But if that's all you're learning, you're going to be tossed something and something's going to go wrong. Something's going to go sideways. The data is not going to be clean. So dealing with those types of, the nitty gritty data problems can be interesting, I'll just say, in the online environment.
Yeah, and I think that's the real part of GIS, right? We all probably make a similar joke in our teaching that's, clean. GIS is mostly cleaning data or something similar. Insert your favorite thing that you do or least favorite thing that you do in GIS here. So the students have to experience that and experience it in a environment where they can actually access help or strategy, because yeah, cleaning data is such, for someone who's never heard of that term or never experienced that, just sounds kind of ridiculous when you just say it without any context. But anyone who's worked with GIS knows exactly, or is imagining their least favorite GIS project ever right now, where they had to clean data up. So the access to help is so essential. And whether that's, yeah, I like drop-in Zoom. We do a huge mix of drop-in office hours, scheduled office hours, scheduling time with me. I've got a signature in my emails that I send out that people can grab time slots in my schedule when I'm available. So, but I also think it is to an extent also like demos. I found my students love a video, and this has been true for, maybe 6 or 7 years. I started getting course evals back, and it was like, we want more videos. We want to watch you do this. And I resisted maybe longer than I should have, but obviously when we went fully remote, and so I was like, well, I can show if everyone's doing this on their own time, then let me show them how to do it. And those videos are still very popular, and I get comments on my YouTube posts from around the world about how helpful some of these things are. So it sounds like perhaps one of the strangest things, but show people your data cleaning. Like, talk through the examples of what you're doing. Why are you searching for the certain attributes? Why are you selecting by this? Why are you, I tend to make lots of little copies of stuff, and I explain why I do that. It might not be the way everyone thinks, but it's demonstrating a way of thinking.
One thing I was going to say was that, with GIS especially, if you have a problem, odds are somebody else also had that same problem. So it's very researchable to where you can actually look up your problem and find your answer. But what I love to see in class is the actual classmates looking over one another's shoulder, or they go to each other's workstation. It's like, oh, well, how did you do that? And so I see them asking, their lab mates instead of, having to resort to approaching me. Not to say I'm scary or anything, but I love to see, them work together in that sense. The last resort is, of course, sending me a screenshot in an email detailing, what am I doing wrong, which is totally fine. But it's to take advantage of that lab time that we have together to where we can all work through these different problems and debug them accordingly.
Yeah, I will say that I start off my class by telling them. So I usually get them when they've already had 1 or 2 intro classes. So they're in the last classes in our program when I typically see them. But I tell them openly and honestly that I was like, GIS is not going to be a solo sport for you. I encourage them to work together, but turn in their own things at the end of the day. And I tell them all the time that, at least every month, I'm shooting out an email to my circle of GIS people if I've run into a problem. And, the people around them are often going to be the people who help. As we all know, you could look at something for a half an hour. Someone comes over your shoulder and they're like, oh, that's exactly what's wrong. and you then want to hurl your computer out the window, but you don't. You restrain yourself. But it's a good way for other people. I think for people who might are worried about their confidence level. That's a big thing in our classes, is that I'm constantly reminding the students, you are the human. It's just software that humans built. It wants to follow a rule, and humans built the rule. So I try to tell them all the time, you are in charge. It's just a computer program. You're smarter than it. And I do love, I exactly agree with you, Courtney. I love when one student who I know has been not so confident walks over to another student and can immediately see what's wrong and the ego boost that happens there. And all it's doing
sure.
is reinforcing that, yes, they're so capable. I mean, if they are so capable of doing all of this, but fear stops a lot of them. They're just so scared to screw something up, lose something, ruin something, break something. And I'm like, nah. And if you do, we've all done it. Life goes on the other side, and we'll figure it out.
So I want to step back for just a minute, because I have a question, and Courtney kind of pointed out that, she came in a little later than, after COVID, as, one of our younger professionals did, TAing and teaching. But to Robin and Forrest, I'm not calling you guys old, I promise. This is a wrestling match, not a tea party. I'm not trying to be rude, and I got to give Brad the credit for that line. But if you had to think back, as long as you guys have been teaching GIS, geospatial topics, I'm really interested in, what key points in past time have kind of identified key changes or fundamental changes in how or what you taught in GIS.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I am thinking both of some positive things that I don't have to deal with anymore, and some things that are just out of this world that I'm not sure why I have to deal with it all. But I'll go with one from each pile. I have to teach students now, and now is maybe in the past 3 or 4 years. Let's call it after we got back to the classroom after COVID. And I say that because UMass had a whole remote year. So we were gone and out of the classroom for a year. So when we came back, I had to start teaching my students how to download and unzip files.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to do that before.
Mm-hmm.
So something in the computer literacy changed. I blame Chromebooks and iPhones personally by name brand. I blame those two things. So that's a new thing. And my Intro GIS class has no prerequisites. So students have never taken downloading and unzipping files 101, right? So that's a new thing that is strange. And when I realized that the first lab had to be, here's how to download and unzip files, it was kind of a surprise. But a lot of my class needs to know that. And guess what? If I'm going to teach them GIS, they need to know how to do that. So I've got to teach them how to do it. And I don't begrudge it. It's not like something that I hold against the students. It's something they need to know. So I need to teach it to them. On the other hand, thinking back to, some back in my day GIS stuff, I've always taught in Esri products, and I sure do have a whole lot less sad faces when ARC randomly crashes in Pro than I did in good old ArcMap. So to the point where an ARC Pro crash is kind of everyone gather around, the program crashed, versus in ArcMap that was 25 times a class period. So there's pluses and minuses, I think, that have changed over the years.
What do you think, Robin?
Well, Forrest's first answer, he totally stole my first answer. Because we're actually in talks with our TAs so that we're going to have, at the beginning of the semester, we're just going to have a data boot camp where students can come in and they can understand what a zip file is, how to download it. The other side of that too is, where is it? Mm-hmm. Students have no concept, because everything has been in this flat file cloud space for them since elementary school. Like here in Ohio, the majority of students walk through all of their K through 12 with Chromebooks. So everything just, it's all that same flat space, and their phones are the same way. So to get them to understand that you have to have some basic, computer science background, because it's still going to stick around. So, yeah, that's the biggest one there. And I would also say, the where things are saved is probably the tie onto that. That's the biggest thing, is just understanding some basic best management practices with naming conventions. That's one that has flared up. And when I first started, everyone knew you can't name something with a space in it because your computer's never going to open the file again. But that's so far not the case for over 10 years now, like 10, 15 years. I also have seen that there's a reduction in basic skills of just like Excel. It used to be 20 years ago at Miami, every student came in and took a basic computing class, Microsoft Word, Excel, all of the basics of your computer. Obviously, that's not needed anymore. But when that flushed out of our system, we suddenly saw in our classes, and as did everyone who was teaching a tech class, we're like, oh, not everybody's coming in on the same page anymore. So we have to circle back and make sure they have some basic skill sets on other things outside of, the GIS software. With GIS, I will say the topics that have changed the most for me are really just the what is GIS topic. Because I can stand in front of any group of people and pull out my phone and say, how many of you have used Apple Maps or Google Maps? And the answer is yes. And I'm like, you're an end user. I was like, you use GIS all the time. There's no longer that barrier between, giving somebody a concept for what it is. And things like aerial photography, you don't have to teach people what it is that they're looking at from the ground, from the top down anymore. Everyone's viewed the world that way since they were little. So those things are really nice that, some of those barriers where you had to spend a lot of time. I just wrapped up the web mapping module that used to take me over a week to try and explain to people, how maps are actually on the web too. And how does that work? And what is the terminology? And what does it look like? You don't have to do that anymore because they are native end users of those things. So some of the stuff is nice. I spend less time in class, but I will say that it just is a reinforcer to me that the fundamentals are so important, because no matter how much technology changes, we're always going to circle back, and what the system is built on, those fundamentals are always going to be there. And as we're in this kind of circular thing of, something goes away and we don't need it anymore, but then we're back to, oh, we do really need to have that thing again. As we go through that cycle, those fundamentals are always going to kind of come to bear. And I don't know if this is going to lead us into the GeoAI topic, which we're not moving towards all that much here. We're trying to plug some stuff into our classes, and our conversations are, what do we need to do for our students in that space? With GeoAI coming, I think we need to be able to teach students how to be those good not just at the end users, but they need to be the good managers who can look at the output and they can understand what created it, all of the parameters that went into it, where the potential errors may have been along the workflow, so that they could understand the result that's coming out and whether or not it's a viable result. And I think that's going to lean so heavily on those fundamentals, which I know all three of us and all five of us in here probably all feel the same, that not remove those fundamentals.
Well, I agree. And I know we're running out of time here, but I got a couple more things, and that is going to lead us to GeoAI briefly here in just a second. But I want to hear from Courtney on the same topic, because Courtney, you came into learning GIS, geospatial things a little later than some of us, and you've now you teach them. When you were coming up through this, what were some of the challenges that you felt like when you were first taking a GIS class, and now that you're the person teaching, and circling back on the same question that we have with Forrest and Robin, what are you seeing now as some of those change points in your own teaching?
Yeah. So I'm going to show my age a little bit. I predate the Chromebooks in high school, so I did not. We actually had computer workstations through junior high and high school, and my 6th grade project was actually saved on a floppy disk for freshman orientation in high school. We were all gifted a 5 gigabyte flash drive because that was the biggest thing at the time. So it was really different because I've taken, computer classes all my life. Coming in as a freshman in college, I also had a Microsoft Office suite class that I took. And, Now, looking back at it, we don't have that anymore. A lot of the computer classes are optional or just non existent anymore. And so, like what Forrest and Robin touched on, my very first lecture before we jump into the software is okay, here's a tutorial. Here is how you will activate your account because we have the named user organization account at UL. And so once you get your ArcGIS notification organization email, this is how you activate your account. This is how you actually go through an installation wizard, because nobody really knows how to download software through a wizard anymore. Because if you go on your phone, all you have to do is just click, yes, I want this app, and it just downloads in the background for you. There's no guided on, what hard drive doesn't need to be saved in, what data folders do you want to save all the content files in. And then so I work through that, teaching them how to actually go through an installation wizard. And yes, the dreaded compressed file, there's a zipper on it, why I can't access it. And you have to teach them, extract all, how to unzip, using ZZip, especially in remote sensing when you have some ZAR files or some GZ files, the TAR files, because regular Windows Explorer doesn't see that as a .zip. And then getting into Excel, oh my gosh, they are terrified of Excel. They're like, I have no idea what to do with this.
Same.
And understanding, using the join table tool, how important those attributes are in those Excel sheets, and that, yes, you cannot have any saved calculations in there. It has to be the raw value, and it has to be saved as a CSV. So trying to explain to them what a XLSX file is that differs from a CSV. And looking at their attribute tables, it's like, oh, you have 2 rows of field names. You cannot do that. Your first row has to be the field names coinciding with the data in the columns. And your second row is actually your first data entry. And so I have to spend some time explaining for Excel what the difference between a row and a column is. And it just surprises me that I have, juniors and seniors in college, and it's no fault of their own. It is no fault of their own. But it's just that, that computer literacy, and it just makes them terrified of computers, because I have some who quiver in my intro GIS class because they just come to me before the beginning of class and they say, look, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I hate computers. I'm probably going to do really bad in this class. I said, no worries. I said, by the end of this class, you will feel so comfortable with it that you can do anything you want to. It's not as scary as you think, especially with this generation who grew up with having all these computers and this technology, and they just have it all at their fingertips, and they just need to be comfortable and properly taught on how to implement it.
That is great. So we've kind of covered all these areas where we've got the fundamentals, even just basic understanding of computers and data and where to find things, how to unpack them, how to get them into the GIS. Just this enormous amount of just knowing the computer, the software, and the data types as well. So we've definitely wrestled around with these issues, and I think this is great. But we're almost out of time, and I have to give each a chance to come back in and give me a 20-second, 30-second synopsis on GeoAI. It's not doing it justice. We're going to have to come back to this, but I want to hear how you guys are starting to either wrestle with it. Robin, you kind of alluded to it already, but what is that going to change fundamentally in your teaching of GIS, and remote sensing, geospatial tech? And where do you see that taking you? So, Forrest.
It's a heavy load for 20 seconds.
It is.
That's fine. I think that we have to be careful about what we're saying when we say GeoAI. We have a rich history of AI in GIS, convoluted neural networks and object-oriented image classification. Things could all be AI, are all AI in a way. If we're talking about generative AI in GIS, I am inherently suspicious and very careful with it. I think that as those tools become more useful and actually work, ask your favorite GPT like system to make a map right now. But as those actually become more useful, it emphasizes the fundamentals. If you're going to tell a computer to do something, you better understand how to do it yourself first.
Excellent. Courtney.
Yeah, so for my classes, especially, I don't introduce it until my advanced class because in remote sensing, we kind of have that transition of the vector data format into raster. And so in there, teach them, image classification first with unsupervised. What does that do? Then supervised. What does that do? And then once we get into advanced, it's like, okay, you were able to go through the tool dialog box of unsupervised and supervised learning and creating your own trample data sets and whatnot. Okay, now we need to actually utilize these deep learning packages and that facilitate all of this without us really doing anything. And it's more of a guided workflow. And so, yes, I agree. Teaching them the fundamentals of what the algorithm is actually supposed to be doing and how you're helping that, and then implementing the deep learning packages on either object-oriented, classification, picking out buildings, yachts, whatever you want, but just to understand how the model was actually created and what data was used, and then how you can better use it and actually create your own training samples to add to that to make the package more meaningful for your area.
Awesome. And I think it's, I want to, Robin, you're up next, but hold on one second, because I think it's really important for, anybody who's listening, and I think most would agree, unless, if you're new to GIS, AI and GIS is not new. And Forrest made a good point of that, and Courtney, you reinforced it. We've been doing machine learning. We've been doing object-based image analysis. We've been doing these things for a long time before, generative AI or AI, as we know it now has come up. But Robin, why don't you finish out these thoughts?
Yeah, so I agree. So where we do have AI built into our classes right now is actually in our Python class. So it's Python for geospatial applications. Really, it's a heavy dose of ArcPy. So this past semester, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to throw an AI module in here and address the elephant in the room of coding and AI. And I did that, and I waited to the end of the semester. I have a strict policy in my class: no AI unless I tell you you're allowed to do it. So by the end of the semester, I was like, okay, you're going to get the opportunity to go back and redo assignments, redo the prompts that I gave you, and you can toss it into, at this time, I think I had them do ChatGPT, and just see what it would get. And then I had them turn it in, clean it up, turn it in as they would turn in a normal assignment for class. And then they had to do a discussion post that kind of talked about whether or not they liked using it or didn't. And it was really entertaining to watch them go through the machinations of giving ChatGPT a prompt, the same prompt. They all got different answers. For the most part, some of them got really nice answers that worked real quick. Other ones got a hot mess that took them hours to try to clean up. So I think for that, it showed them that this thing that they had been so clamoring to use all semester isn't always the panacea that they want it to be. And it's not consistent. And that was actually a learning point for me too, because I kind of assumed that they would all get similar answers. So I think this is another point too for people who are listening, is that with AI, you have to remember the students aren't the only ones learning. Like, this is changing so fast. As an instructor, you cannot keep up with it. I am trying to run, this race with the students and be maybe a half step to like trip over things before they get to them. But we really we're going to have to just embrace this learning together way of being here for the next, couple of years before we really see the best way to integrate it into our classrooms.
You only have to be one lab ahead of them, Robin. Just one lab ahead.
Just one. Maybe it's a half one too.
I just want to piggyback off of something that Robin said. And so in the capstone class that I do, I teach them the Python scripting ArcGIS tutorial book and integrate the machine learning and deep learning packages in there. And part of their final project is that they have to go through certain processes with the tool dialog box and then running it in an AI situation. And they have to provide a methodology synthesis comparing the pros and cons of when can we use the traditional tool dialog box options in the geoprocessing pane, or when, AI deep learning packages are actually pretty useful in streamlining some of these workflows. That's it. Thank you.
Well, I see that the ref is just about ready to give us the 3 count. So I was going to ask for some last quick final thoughts here as we wrap up our wrestling match. And I was going to start with Forrest for some last thoughts here on our match today.
Teach what the students need to know, and what they need to know changes over time for better and worse. And it's our job to make sure that we're leveraging our expertise in the geospatial GIS space to prepare them. And so we're going to keep preparing them, whether or not the big scary AI bot comes for us all someday. I think that there's probably a lot in the geospatial world that is still going to be relevant and is still going to require us to teach.
When an AI starts zapping Arnold Schwarzenegger back in time at us to do GIS, then we're all in a lot of trouble there.
What would they do with Arc Pro in 1987? Let's find out.
Dun, 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 dun. And Courtney, what are your final thoughts here for the match?
Yeah, so as we can see, GIS will be forever changing. I don't know if we'll ever reach some sort of technology plateau or not, but it's just about being patient and being useful with the time that you have with these students and preparing them at the best of your ability and knowing that you are learning with them along the way.
And finally, do a power bomb to wrap it up, Robin.
Well, my power bomb is going to reference the Muppets. So for my classes, we have a mascot, and it's Grover, because he is the lovable furry monster who's terrified of himself at the end of his book. So just to say that I think a lot of this is when we're teaching, it's about building confidence in our students. They all come in from a variety of different places, and whether I'm teaching GIS or I'm teaching something else, I think providing them with the background that they need so they can confidently go in with the vocabulary that makes sense. And they also go in with the confidence of knowing that they are the person that's in charge. And they also, when it's okay to say, I don't know, I will say that. I say, I don't know all the time. And I say it in front of them and we find out together. So being willing to admit when you don't know is sometimes just as powerful as knowing the right answer all the time.
And that's the bell from the ref. But I wanted to thank all of you for venturing into the squared circle today in order to grapple with teaching GIS. So thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad and Chris.
Thank you.
And Chris, to wrap things up, where can everybody find us online?
Well, I wanted to, thanks, Brad, and thanks everybody for that great conversation. And we're gonna have to do this again, and I think we'll have an equally as long of a show. I think this is probably one of our longer podcasts. But if folks want to certainly head on over to Substack, you can see the show notes for this show and follow along with all of our other guests that we've had. You can certainly subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done that. Head over to americaview.org to check out some of the great materials that are downloadable for free there from our members across the country, and certainly all of our social channels at AmericaView, including over at YouTube, where there's some great recorded content. As everyone here has talked about, putting videos online, there's some great stuff there to help folks get along with their GIS careers.
And as always, we'd like to thank our editor, Matt Wozniak, for making us sound good. And our theme music comes courtesy of Mr. Matthew Maxwell. Also, if you're listening to this podcast on a platform that would let you leave us a review, if you could do so, not only would we'd really appreciate that, but that genuinely does help get this show out into the hands of more people. But we'll be back soon with another episode. So until then, I'm Brad Shellito.
I'm Chris McGinty.
And you keep watching the skies for those spatial signals out there.